everyone.
Hey everyone, good morning. So we will just allow two minutes for the people to join in. So today we have a issue with the Zoom, so we just started with the YouTube live. Yeah, I think we can start now, guys. So everyone, good morning. So yesterday we have started with the identity services that is offered by the Azure, right? So we have seen like how Active Directory is working, how do we create the users and groups in the Active Directory, and how do the administrators manage the users and groups. So all these things we have seen yesterday. So today we will see and understand about the like what are administrative units and how does the RBAC like role based access control works in the Azure portal and in the Azure services. Yeah, so we will see like what are the administrative services and how do we create them, what is the business use case of these administrative units, and what are the administrative units. So we will see, we will discuss about these administrative units today. So basically like what is an administrative unit? So administrative unit is basically the unit or the organization how it manages the users and groups. So it can be they can manage it through the IT help desk team, or they can manage it through the separate administration team, and they can do it in multiple ways. But the problem with the on-prem traditional Active Directory in managing the users and groups is that there will be a single administrative unit which will be used for across all the which will be used across the domain. So like every administrator will have access to the users and groups, and every administrator can manage them, which is not a good scenario, which is not a good ideal thing for the user management in the organizations. So here if we can see we have two users, like let's assume like these two users are in two different two different locations. So let's assume like first user is in the US location and second user is in the Canada location. So now if these users has raised a request for resetting their password, or like they need to update the information they use in their user profile. So these administrators, like there can be multiple administrators, right, for management of the users and groups. So all the administrators in that organization, like who is managing the Active Directory, will have access to these user profiles, and they can edit the profile, or they can change the password for every user across all the locations. So now this administrator can manage the user profile for the user who is in US and the user who is in Canada, and the second administrator as well, he can manage the users who is in US and who is in Canada. So this is not the ideal scenario. So this should not be the case, like while doing the user management and all. So to eradicate this, or like to prevent this and to enhance the security levels of the user management, Azure has come up with a way called administrative unit. So in the Active Directory on-premises Active Directory, we used to call them as organizational units, and now it is replaced by the administrative units with the advanced features and the advanced security levels. So now this is the administrative unit. So we have two different groups, like the HR group and the finance group, and we have two different admins. So let's assume like each administrator is responsible for only a particular group. So this user this user is responsible only for the HR group, and this particular user is responsible only for the finance group. So whenever any user management ticket, or like any request comes up to update the information in the user profile for the finance group, only this particular administrator who has access to that finance group can manage the group, or he can only edit the group, and the user who is the owner of the HR group will not have access to the finance group unless and until it is provided explicitly. So let's assume that the first administrator has access only to the HR group, and the second administrator has access only to the finance group. So if the request comes up from the finance group, there are a set of users, let's assume like there are a set of users in the finance group, let's say like we have 10 users. So this particular administrator is responsible only for the finance group, and he will be he is responsible only for the 10 users in that particular group. So only this administrator who has access to this finance group will be able to manage the users, or like will be able to manage the groups, like resetting the password or like updating the user profiles and all. In the same way, the administrator who is responsible for the HR group, only that particular admin will be able to manage the HR group and manage the users under that HR group. So the like only like other administrator who has no access to the group cannot manage the users in the other group. So we can see like admin with the specific access to a group only can manage these users in that group. So this is what administrative units is. So this is the main difference between the organizational units and administrative units is that organizational units is on the on-premises traditional Active Directory, where like we will have only the organizational units, and all the admins can provide access or will have access to the all the groups and all the users across the domain. Whereas in the administrative unit, only the particular user or the particular admin who is responsible or who is the owner of that particular group only can manage the user access. So what are the key concepts in this administrative units? So first we will see like what is the purpose of administrative unit. So the purpose of administrative unit is that to manage the Azure AD resources, providing a container for groups and user objects. So container in the sense like it's the group, or like it's an entity which manages the groups and the users, and it allows the benefits for the administrative units to control the scope for admin users. So admin users also will be assigned only at the group level or only at the user level for managing the access, or like where we are controlling the scope. So we are not allowing the admins as well to manage the users or to manage the groups across the domain. We are restricting the admins as well for a specific set of groups or specific set of users. So these administrative units we can create based on the geographical locations, or based on the business departments, or based on the teams that we have in the organization. So let's say like we have like Nosfer has two different branches, like let's assume so one is in India and another one is in UK. So now if we go for the Azure Active Directory service, we can have a separate administrative units, one for the Indian location and other for the UK location, where all the users that are getting registered from India will be registered onto the Indian administrative unit or the Indian directory service, whereas the users registering from the UK are getting registered for the UK Active Directory service. And only the person only the admin or who has access for the Indian location, only he will be able to manage the users and the groups in the Indian location. And the admin in the UK location cannot manage the users and groups which are in the Indian location, because we are restricting the access at the scope level using these administrative units. So apart from the geographical locations, we can also create the users based on the we can also create the administrative units based on the business departments. So we will have multiple departments or like multiple teams in the organization, right? So let's say like we have a HR group, we have a finance group, and we have an IT group, and we have like the user group and all. So based on these departments, the business departments as well, we can create the administrative units, and we can restrict the access to the administrators to manage the users or to manage the groups only for that particular department or for that particular group. So is this clear, guys? So why do we use administrative units, and like what are the use of administrative units? Okay. So now we will see the SSPR. So SSPR is basically we call it as like a self-service password reset. So there should be a tool, or like there should be some way like for resetting the password on our own, right? So instead of depending upon the administrators every time, so we need to have a separate way, or like we need to have a separate tool for resetting the password, or like forgot password things and all. So every time we cannot raise a ticket to the IT team, and we will wait till the request get approved, or like till that our ticket has been taken care. So like there will be a lot of like productivity loss in case if we do that. So in order to eradicate that, or like in order to improve the productivity, we will have this SSPR service configured in the Azure, which we call it as a self-service password reset. So this is the one of the service offered by the Azure. So this is basically the tool which is integrated in Azure as a service for resetting the password of the users by their own. So the users can reset their own password, and they can if they forgot the password, like they can easily change it or reset it using this SSPR. So now we will see like what is the oldest method, like what is the old traditional method that like when we want to reset the password. So let's say like I am a user and I have forgotten the password. I am a user and I have forgotten the password. So now if I want to reset my password, I have to raise a ticket to the IT team, and IT team like they will wait for the approval for the password reset. And once the approval comes in, like they some person or the like the teammate from the IT team should take care of the ticket, and like he should reset the password. So which will take some ample amount of time. So let's say like let's consider like if the whole this process takes like 3 to 4 hours. So now there is a productivity loss from us to the organization or to the company for those 3 to 4 hours, right? Just because like I have forgotten the password, or like my password has been expired. So in like this is only for the one user. So let's assume like if it has to be done for the bulk users. So let's say like if there are like 10 tickets or like 100 tickets of coming up to the IT team for resetting the password. So how much time it will take for the IT team to resolve all of them, and like what is the you can imagine like what is the productivity loss to the organization because of this. So to eradicate all this, and like to eradicate all this, like Azure has come up with a service called SSPR, where the user can directly change or reset their password, so that like the product will be increased. Like they no need to create the ticket to the IT team, they no need to wait for the approvals, they no longer need to wait for the IT team member to pick up the ticket and all. And if you see from the IT team end as well, like their workload will be gradually decreased, because like more the password reset and like password change requests are not coming up to them. So the IT team workload will be gradually decreased. So let's say like he is the IT administrator, and the IT administrator like he will not have any involvement in the password reset of the users. So they'll different users can reset their own password using this SSPR tool or SSPR service. So what is the process like we follow in the SSPR or like in the SSPR service? So the first one is the localization. So localization is basically like configuring and setting up the service in the Azure portal. Like we will just use that SSPR service, and we will set up that service in a way that like how do we validate the users, or like how do the users authenticate to that SSPR service or to the SSPR portal, and like how do they reset the password, and how do the system or the service sends the reset notification mail to the user and all. So that we call it as a localization, where we configure the service. And once the service is configured, we have a next phase as verification. So once the configuration is set, like the verification, we need to verify the identity of the user. So if the particular user is has authorization to reset the password or not, or like is he using his correct email ID, or he is trying to spam someone other's email ID. So we need to verify that identity, correct? So I cannot go and simply reset the password of the other guy. So that identity I need to verify that if I am actually resetting my own password, or I am resetting the other guy's password. So for verifying this identity, we have so let's guess this scenario. So we have a Facebook, right? So in the Facebook, I am sure that like most of the people forget the Facebook passwords since like we everyone use the mobile apps. So if at all like if we need to change the password of the Facebook, so it will ask us to prove our identity, right? Last remember password, or I upload your photo for the for the identity verification and all, right? So the same way like we will be having the verifying, we will be setting up the identity verification to verify if the user is actually resetting his own password. So after the identity is verified, we can have, there is a phase called authentication and authorization. So in this authentication and authorization phase, the system will verify if the particular user has access to reset the password, or like is he authorized to reset the password on his own. So we need to verify that one as well in the authentication and authorization phase. So once the service is configured and the identity is verified and the user has access on he is authorized to reset the password on his own, he can just reset the password by going into the portal, and the notification will be set once the reset is done. So the user should know, right, like when how the what did he do, like did he reset the password or did he change the password and all, like so those will be sent via the reset notification from the service. So these are the multiple phases that are involved while while we are using the SSPR, self-service password reset. So first one we have is the localization, where we configure the service. Next one we have is the verification, where we verify the identity of the user, and once the user identity is verified, we will go through the authentication and authorization process, where we will check if the user is really authorized to change the password or to reset the password by himself. And if he is authorized, he will the user can reset the password from the portal or from the service, and the reset notification mail will be sent to the user. So if we see the authentication methods, so how do we authenticate to the application, or how do we authenticate to the service? So we have multiple ways for authentication. So we have a mobile app, we can authenticate through the mobile app, or we can authenticate through the mobile app code, or we can authenticate through the email service, or the mobile phone, or through the office phone, or through the security questions and all. So I guess like most of the people have already seen, might have seen at least one of these authentication methods till now. So how do we authenticate through the mobile app? So let's assume like we have a third party software, or like third party vendor. In this case, like let's assume like we have a Microsoft Authenticator. So Microsoft Authenticator is an authentication tool where the user will register to that authenticator application, like mobile application, and whenever like he wants to authenticate, he can just select the authentication method as mobile app, and he can configure his account in the Microsoft Authenticator, and he can approve the request every time the request comes into the mobile application. Every time if he tries to log in into the application, the request should be approved from the mobile app first. So there will be like a request coming up to the application, to the authenticator application. The user should allow or deny the access for logging into that particular service. So next one we have is the mobile app code. So instead of pushing the request, push request, or approving the request through the mobile app, so we can also use the mobile application code for the as an authentication method. So in the Microsoft Authenticator, we have another feature as well to select the either the approval authentication, and the approval should be through the push request or through the application code. So there will be like 6 to 8 digit code that is randomly generated for every 30 seconds in the application, and we just need to enter that code that is displaying on our application, and we need to enter that in the service or to the portal where we are trying to log in. So once we enter that application code in the mobile application code which is used for authentication, so if we enter that into the service, or we are trying to log in, or the application we are trying to log in, that particular application will contact the Microsoft Authenticator service, and it will check if the code is matched or not. If that particular code that we have entered has matched, the user will be able to log in into the server, into the application, or else the access will be denied. So in the same way, we can use the email as well as the authentication method. So whenever we are trying to log in into the application, we can get the OTP through the email, and we will just enter the OTP in the application that we are trying to log in. So most of you guys might be using the internet net banking, right? So when you are trying to log in into net banking, we are getting the OTP to our SA as a SMS and as an email. So we just need to verify our authentication. We just need to verify our identity by entering that SMS OTP, right, or the email OTP. So in that way we can set up the email authentication as well, where the user will get the OTP through the email when he is trying to log in. And once the user is authenticated with that OTP code, he will be able to log in into the application. And next thing we have is the access to authentication through the mobile phone. So user can authenticate through the mobile phone using a phone call or an SMS. So when the user is trying to log in into the application, he will be getting the OTP in the SMS or in the phone call. So the user just needs to enter that SMS in the application, and he will be able to log into the application if the OTP entered is correct. Or else we can access or we can authenticate through the office phones as well. So we have this Vivo IP phones, like voice over IP phones. So we can configure the authentication methods through the Vivo IP phones as well. So whenever we are trying to log into the application, we will be getting a call to the office phone or to the Vivo IP phone. So once we lift the call, we can just press the hash button or the hash key, and we can authenticate into the application. Or then the next thing we have is the security questions, which is most often used by the users. The security questions is considered as the most secured way for authenticating the users. So we can when we register for the application, we just need to set a few security questions, and we need to give the answers for it. So every time we are trying to log in into the application, any one of the random questions that we have set up will be displayed on the page, and we just need to provide the answer as we have given it during the registration. So let's say when we are trying to log in into the application, we need to register. If we need to provide the answers to at least four security questions, we need to select 4 security questions and provide them answers to it, which will be stored in the backend. So when we are trying to log in into the application after registering, so if we need to authenticate with the security question, any one of the random question from those registered 4 questions will be displayed on the web page on the application, and the user needs to enter the answer for it, so that he will be authenticated into the application if the answer provided to him was correct. So what are the key considerations that we should keep in mind while providing this SSPR, on providing this authentication methods? So SSPR require, when we are doing the when we are configuring the self-service password reset, we should at least need one required method, at least one authentication method is required for logging into the SSPR. So out of the 6 authentication methods, out of the 6 authentication methods that we have, so we need to select at least one of the authentication method for logging into the SSPR. And by default, there will be administrators for the SSPR as well, right? For monitoring or for administrating this SSPR service. So that the administrator, who are admins for this SSPR, cannot have the security questions, or they cannot have the mobile authentication and all. So by default, they need to register to the MFA, which is through the which is through the mobile code. Just give me a moment, guys. Okay. And also like we need to be like SSPR can be configured only with the specific set of licenses. So we need to have Azure, at least Azure Active Directory P1, P2, or the Microsoft 365 license, which to configure the SSPR in our environment. Okay. So any doubts in this, guys? Like how do we configure the SSPR and how do we uh, set up the SSPR and the authentication methods? Okay. So next we will see like how do we manage the devices, like how do we manage the instances, or how do we manage the devices and the applications that we have in our Azure. So basically like we need to register our devices, like whatever the devices or whatever the application that we have, we need to register them to our Active Directory in order to manage them. So managing in the sense like we need to perform the patch upgrades, or we need to perform the device updates, or we need to perform increase the disk space and all, right? Or like we need to like providing access to the users for in that Active Directory through the Active Directory for those devices. So to perform all these, we need to register these devices with our domain. So whatever the instances that we have, we need to have it to our domain in order to provide the network level security, or not to allow the users to log in into that particular devices. So let's assume like I have a server that I am running on. So I want only my user, like I don't want the public users to log in into that particular server. So only I need only my users, or like my organization employees to log in into that particular server. So in that case, I will register my device onto the Azure Active Directory, and I will allow only the network level access, like, and I will provide the specific set of rules where only the users coming up with this particular or domain or the particular organization should log in into this device. So in order to perform all these security tasks or like administration tasks, we need to register the devices to the Azure Active Directory. So how do we register the devices? So we had three different types to register the devices in the Azure Active Directory. So the first one is the Azure AD registered. Just a moment, guys. Okay, so the first way to register the device onto the Azure Active Directory is Azure AD registered. So we can get our own device, like, or we can get our own machine from like a personal laptop or like a personal device, and we can get them registered on the Azure Active Directory, so that like we can manage that device from the Azure AD. And this is like the access restrictions and and the security restrictions will be very low in this type of registrations, like registering the devices to the Azure. So mostly like Windows 10 or Windows 10 operating systems, iOS and the Android applications are supported in the are supported for this Azure ready registered devices. So this method we call it as a BYOD. So bring your own device. So in the Azure ready registered in the registered option, so we'll allow like it allows the our own device to be registered with the Azure Active Directory, and we can manage that through the AD. And next one we have is the Azure AD joined. So what is the difference between Azure AD registered and Azure AD joined? So in case of Azure AD registered, we will get we will have our own device getting registered on the Azure Active Directory. Whereas in case of Azure AD joined, that particular machine or that particular asset is already owned by us, like by an organization, and we are just joining them to the Azure Active Directory. So once the instance is up, like once the instance is created or once the asset is created, we will just join them with the Azure AD so that we can perform the administration activities and the security tasks using the Azure Active Directory account. So most of the server operating systems like Windows 10 or Windows 2012 or 2016 or server OS 2019, so all these are supported through in this Azure AD joined. So in Azure AD register, like in most of the cases, we'll be using it as the laptops or the mobile devices. Whereas in the Azure AD join, we will be using it for the instances or the servers that we have. So next one we have is the hybrid Azure AD join. So hybrid Azure AD join is similar to the Azure Active Directory, Azure AD join, but we can join the devices or we can join the instances onto the Azure Active Directory from the on-premises as well. So in Azure AD join, we can register the devices only that are hosted on the Azure Active Directory. Whereas in the hybrid model, we can also join the devices which are on the on-premises. So Windows 7 operating system or like 8.1 or the Windows 10 like a desktop operating systems or the server operating systems like which are starting later 2008 like Windows Server 2008 or 2012 or to 16 19. So all these Windows operating systems Windows operating server OS or OS will be supported in the hybrid Azure AD join. So we have three options for registering the devices: the Azure AD registration, Azure AD registered, Azure AD join, and the hybrid Azure AD join. So in the Azure AD registered, we will be registering our own devices, which we call it as a BYOD, like bring your own device. And in the Azure AD join, we will join the devices which are on the Azure portal. And also in the hybrid Azure AD join, we will join the devices from the on-premises as well. So how do we set the conditional access policies? So first of all, like what are the conditional access policies? So conditional access policies are the authentication and the authorization policies that are set in an organization to allow or deny the access to the users based on the condition that we set. So let's assume like we have a cloud subscription. So we have a cloud subscription and we have like multiple devices or multiple applications or the users that are connected with the Azure Active Directory. So here like on the Active Directory, we will create a conditional access policy to access the resources or the users based on the conditions that we set. So let's say like I have set an condition at the Active Directory level, where like if the user cannot access the application if he enter the if the particular condition is not met. So the condition will be validated at the subscription level or at the Active Directory level. So once the condition is true, the user will be able to access the resources, or if the condition is false, the user will not be able to access the resources. So basically the access will be denied. So this is what the conditional access policy is. So we will set the conditions for the access policies at the Active Directory level, and based on the conditions that we set, the user will be able to access or deny the user will be able to access the resources, or the access will be denied based on the condition that we set. So and also we can also set the conditions in such a way that what is the maximum number of retries that the user should try if he forgot the password, or like what is the maximum number of sessions is allowed, concurrent sessions is allowed for that particular user. So everything we can set it up in the conditional access policies. So applications, users or devices like which are connected to the Azure Active Directory authenticate through the Azure Active Directory and able to access the resources only if the condition is met, or else the access will be blocked to that particular user if the condition is not met. So what are the different access policies that we can set up or in the conditional access policies? So we can set up based on the IP address or location of the IP address, or we can set up based on the users or the groups that they're part of, or we can also set up based on the device device type and the device state, and we can also set up based on the application application level scope. We can perform the conditional access policies, and we can also analyze the real-time risk. So in this Azure in the device management, like in the Active Directory device management, we can create the devices, or we can join the devices, or we can provide the access to the devices based on the location of the IP addresses. So let's say I want the users from only from the US location to be able to log in into that into the application, but not the users from rest of the world. So in that case, I will detect the IP address location from where it is originating, and I will allow the access only if the origin location is from the US, or else we will just deny the access. So based on the IP address location, like the originating location of the IP address, we can allow or deny the access to the users or to the applications. And also we can provide the access, we can provide the access, or we can restrict the access based on the users and the groups. So I want to provide access to only a particular group, so I will be assigning the roles or I will be providing the access only to that particular group for that particular instance or to the particular resource, and only the members of that particular group will be able to access the application or the service. And also we can also set the access policy based on the device type and the device state. So let's say I have a web application, and I want the users to access the web application only through the laptop, not from the mobile or not from the iPad or tablet. So in that case, I can set up the conditional access policy where I will just check if I will just check where is that the request is coming from. Is it from the device, or it from the tablet, or is it from the mobile phone? So based on that request, the request device type originator, I will just allow or deny the access to the resources or to the users to the application. And also we can provide the access to the applications based on the through the application as well. So now I have two different applications where I want the two different applications to communicate with each other to perform some task, or I want to I want to two resources, two different resources in Azure to communicate to communicate among themselves to perform a task. So let's say I have web application which needs to communicate with the database to push the data, or to push the retrieve the data from the database. So in that case, I should allow the access to the application to the database, so that the application can communicate with the database for writing up the data into the database or retrieving the data from the database. So we can also we can provide the access policies based on the application as well. And the most important security feature of this device management is that it has the internal monitoring to identify the risks and to mitigate the risk that we are going to face through the device or the user that is logging into the environment. So it will calculate, it will monitor the real time risk coming up with the user, and it will try to mitigate the risk that is coming up by protecting the user identities. By protecting the user identities as well. So basically, what is a device management? So device management is the device identity of the device plus the conditional access is what we call it as a device management. So it is basically the simplified procedure for adding and managing the devices. So if we want providing we want to manage the access to the users, or we want to manage the access to the applications and all, right. So it's a simplified process for managing this access policies using this adding the devices through the Active Directory. And also based on these conditional policies, the user experience also will be improved based on the devices that they are looking for, that they are looking onto. So as I said, I have a web application, and I just want the users to log in into the application only through the laptop, not through the iPad or not through the mobile. So that will improve the experience. The website application or the application experience will be improved to the user, which might not be good in the other devices. And we can also there is also a support from Azure to the Microsoft Intune for this device management. We can have the Intune setup, we can integrate that with the Azure Active Directory, and for which for the users to authenticate, or for the users to allow to access that particular service. And also we can enable the single sign-on for any of the devices or for any of the users that are logged in or that are registered with that particular device manager with that Azure Active Directory. So this is about Azure Active Directory and the device administrative units and the device management. So is this clear, guys? Okay, so next we will see the role based access control. So what is a RBAC? RBAC is basically the role based access control, where we can provide the access to the resources to the particular users at the scope level. So scope is something that the hierarchy that we have it in the Azure. So it can be the management group, or it can be the tenant, or the subscription level or at the resource group level or at the resources. So we can provide the access to the users, or we can restrict the access to the users at that particular scope. And also we can also provide the custom roles to the user. So like what actions that the user can perform, or like what actions the user cannot perform. So all these actions or all these roles that we can assign it to the user under the RBAC, like role based access control. So in this we will see like what is an RBAC, like what is a role based access control, what are the Azure roles and what are the Azure AD roles, and what is the key differences between the Azure roles and the Azure Active Directory roles. So now coming to like RBAC, like what is an RBAC? RBAC is the role based access control which is provided to the where we provide the access to the security principles. So yesterday we have discussed about the service principles, right? So we can provide the access we can provide the access to the service principles or to the user based on the roles that we assign at the particular scope. So here we need to remember like three keywords, like three general keywords in the RBAC. First one is who, what and where. So talking about who, what comes under this who? So we need to keep in mind that to whom or we are providing the access to. Is it to a user, or is it to a service principal, or is it to a application? That all comes under the security principles. So based on the security principles, next one we have is the what. So what is nothing but like what role that we are assigning it to the user. So is it a owner role, or is it a administrator role, or is it a contributor role, or is it like it can be the raider role and all. So what is nothing but the role that we are assigning to user, like what access that we are provided to the user. And next one we have is the where. Where in the sense where like to which resource or to which instance that we are providing the access, or to, at which scope level we are providing the access to the user. So it can be at the management group level, or it can be at the tenant level, it can be at the subscription level, it can be at the resource group and the resources level as well. But if we provide the access at the management group level, the same access privileges will be followed up by the downfall in the hierarchy that we have. So let's assume like if I provide a contributor access to a user at the management group, so the contributor access will be available to all the resources or all the subscriptions that are under the management group. So user can manage, like the particular user will be a contributor to all the subscriptions or to all the resource group and all the resources which are hosted under that management group level. So RBAC, like role based access control, is the security principle to assign the roles for the users based on the permissions to access the scopes or to access the resources. So if we can see here, like this is the security principles that we have, where we will have the service principles or the applications or the users and all. So from there, like we will assign the role assignments based on the roles that we have already defined in the Azure. And once the role is assigned, where those permissions are validated, and the users will be able to access the scope. Like scope is nothing but the resources that we provide the access to. Okay. Yeah, Lakshmi Prasad, I will take up your question at the end. We will complete this, and like we will have the Q&A session at the end. So let's assume this scenario, like we have a security principle, like we are assigning access to the user at the Active Directory level, and we are assigning the contributor access where he will have access to all the user to perform all the actions except the authorization to delete. So we assign that access at the subscription level. So whatever the access that we have provided to this particular user at the subscription level, that will be inherited to the resource group and to the resources as well. So see, like now we are assigning the contributor access to the user at the subscription level, right? So the same contributor access will be assigned to the resource groups and the resources which are hosted under this particular subscription. So now if we see this contributor, like if we see this particular snippet of code, so this is the sample JSON code that we write to provide the contributor access. We can assign those roles through the contributor, like a contributor role, like Azure roles through the portal as well. But in the backend, the access policies and the access privileges will be stored in the JSON objects or in the JSON format. So here if we can see, here we have mentioned the actions as star. So star is nothing but like we are providing all the access, or like we are providing the access to perform all the actions on this contributor level, except except the authorization and the deletion. So not actions in the sense like the user will not be able to perform these operations. So he cannot provide the authentication to the other users, or he cannot delete the resources from the environment or from the subscriptions. So here we are assigning this access at the subscription level, and that access will be inherited by the resource groups and the resources that we have. So what are the different types of roles that we have? So in Azure we have like multiple roles where to provide and to use it for the RBAC, like role based access control. So the first thing we have is the owner role. So owner role is nothing but the owner of that particular resource, or the owner of that particular subscription, or the particular resource group. So he is the owner of that particular resource. He can do anything with that resource. So he can update the resource, or he can delete the resource, or he can provide access to the other users, or he can delegate the access to the other users using his owner role. So owner role has full privileges to perform any operations on that particular resource. So next one we have is the reader role, where this is the least privileged role that we have in the Azure. So the user will, with the reader role, will be able to only view the resource, and he cannot perform any operations, administrative, or he cannot perform any administrative tasks. Like he cannot modify the resource, or he cannot update the resource, he cannot delete the resource. So all these administrative tasks cannot be performed if the user is assigned with the reader role. So next one we have is the contributor role. So contributor role is similar to the owner role, where the user will be able to manage, create, and update the resources, except which he cannot delegate the access to the other users. So let's say like I have a owner role now, and if I want to provide access, and there is a request coming up to provide access to a particular user on a particular service. So since I have a owner role, I can provide the access to the users for the resources, because like I am the owner of it and I have full access to that particular resource, and I can delegate my access, and I can provide access to the users for that particular resource. And now I have a contributor role. So if there is a request that is coming up to provide access to the user for a particular resource, so I cannot do that, since I have a contributor role and I cannot delegate the access to the other users. Whereas I can create, manage, update, and delete the resources at that particular scope level. So the next thing we have is the user administrator role. So in the user administrator role, the user can only delegate the access to the other users, but he cannot create and manage the resources at that particular scope level. So if I have a user administrator role, I can just provide the access to the other users, but I cannot create a new resource, or I cannot update the resource, or I cannot delete the resource. I cannot perform any type of administrative task on that particular devices, or on that particular resources if I have the user administrator role. So user administrator role is similar to the reader role, except which he can provide the access to the other users. So these are the Azure roles that we have it in the Azure Active Directory. So next one we have is the Azure AD roles. So there is a difference between Azure roles and the Azure AD roles. So Azure AD roles are basically the roles assigned for a Active Directory service. So it is provided only for the Azure Active Directory, but it will not be inherited to all the subscriptions or all the management groups that we have. So under Azure AD role, the first thing we have is the global administrator. So global administrator is something that, like, if we have multiple services, so as we discussed in the previous sessions, Azure Active Directory is a global service, right? So we need to have at least one person to manage all these services at the global level. So they have a role for it called named as global administrators, where the global administrator can manage the Active Directory resources across the regions or across the locations. So if I have my directory services installed at two locations, one at India and one at UK, and I being a global administrator, I can manage the user access, group access, group policies, and the security requirements. So everything I can manage in the both the locations, since I am the global administrator for the Azure Active Directory in my organization. So next one we have is the billing administrator. Billing administrator will have access only to the billing options to be referred. So we have the cost management and billing options that are coming up, like where it is analyzing the forecast and it is providing us the, like, how much the amount can be charged, like what should be the estimated amount for that particular subscription or for that particular management group, and like what is the current cost that we have, and we can create the budgets as well. So all these billing tasks we can perform, right? So only the billing administrator can perform those activities when the particular user is provided with that billing administrator access. He cannot manage or manage or modify or create or delete any types of resources in Azure, except he can accept the billing activities. Next one we have is the user administrator. So user administrator is basically these user administrator will be basically at the location level. So let's assume that we have a Active Directory service, one at India and another one at UK, right? So I will have two user administrators to manage and users from the Indian location, and one from the UK region to manage and configure the users and groups in the UK location. So here the user administrator only can manage the users and groups and device manage and registering the devices to the Active Directory. So next one we have is the IT administrator, where he will be responsible for configuring the SSPR, like the self-service password reset or the multi-factor authentication. Like for resetting the passwords and changing the user passwords. So all these activities will be coming under the IT administrator. So in the Azure roles, we have the different roles as a owner, raider, contributor, and the user access administrator. Whereas in the Azure AD roles, we have the roles like global administrator, billing administrator, user administrator, and the IT administrator. So guys, don't get confused with the Azure roles and the Azure AD roles. So what are the key differences between Azure AD roles and the Azure roles? So Azure AD roles are used to manage the access at the Azure AD resources level. So if a user is assigned with the Azure AD role, that particular user will be able to manage only the Azure AD resources. Whereas the Azure resources, the user will be able to access or perform the administrative tasks on all the Azure resources at the scope level that he has been provided access with. So by default, the Azure AD role, the scope is at the tenant level, whereas for the Azure roles that we have, whatever the roles that we have is a owner, a contributor, and all. So those can be at the multiple levels. So it can be at the resource group level, or it can be at the subscription level, or it can be at the resource level as well. So what are the main roles of the Azure AD roles? Azure AD. So we have a global administrator, we have user administrator, billing administrator, and the IT administrator. Whereas in the Azure roles, we have the roles like owner, contributor, reader, and user access administrator. So in order to use the RBAC, like role based access control, we need to keep these three considerations in the mind while performing that while assigning the access to the users. So the first one is the select user. So we need to select like which user do we need to provide access to. So this is the where we call it as a who. So pick who needs access to the Azure resources. And next one, we need to select the role, like what access or the what privileges that we need to provide it to the user. So this is what we call it as what. Pick what roles gives necessary permissions to that particular user based on his requirement. So next one is the scope. So to which resource or at what scope level we need to provide the access to the users. So this is what we call it as a where. So we need to pick where the permission should be provided. So these three details or these three considerations we need to keep it in mind while using the RBAC, like role based access control. So first we need to select the user, we need to select the role, and we need to select the scope. Okay, is this clear, guys? Okay, Lakshmi Prasad is asking that, like, can you come again with the MS Intune? Okay, MS Intune is basically the company portal app which is developed by the Microsoft. So let's say like if our organization is running on the Microsoft resources like Microsoft Teams or the Outlook or the Microsoft Excel, like other SharePoint services and all. So we have a separate portal called like Microsoft Intune portal, where we can access all these apps or like all these services through a single portal. Like it's like the access for a dashboard in the mobile, where we will register to that particular application, where we will register our company account or in that particular portal, and we will be able to access the resources. So now that Intune, like whatever the devices that we are managing by the Intune, or like whatever the devices that are installed with the Intune in their devices, so those devices can be managed by registering them at the Azure AD device management. I hope I answered your question. So Avi is asking like, please repeat user admin. Okay, so admin user, like the difference between global administrator and the admin user is that as a global admin, he can have access or he can manage the resources and the users and groups across the globe. So whatever the region our location our services can be. So the global administrator can manage the users and groups since he is a global admin. But the user administrator, he can only access or manage the resources or the users and groups or the devices configurations only at the location that he is responsible for. So user administrator is basically like the group owner that we have for managing the users or the groups in that particular location. Okay, so is there any other thing, guys? Okay, so you guys can just create the resources or create a user in the Azure Active Directory and try to create the role assignments for that particular user. So like that we have demonstrated in the yesterday's session, right? So you can refer to the yesterday's session and you can demonstrate and you can practice it using the yesterday's demonstration. Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for joining the session. If you guys have any doubts, you can just reach out to us.